would be appropriate.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second annual Fireside Chat with NASAA. My name is Julie Mendel, and I'm the Education Trustee for the SILA Foundation. Before introducing today's speakers, I have a couple of reminders for everyone. This webinar is about an hour in length and is being recorded. We ask that you mute your microphone and turn off your video so the focus will remain on our speakers. Please put your questions into the chat box. We will be monitoring those and posing them to our speakers on your behalf. If we do run out of time and you still have questions or there are still questions in the chat, we'll address them via email after the webinar. Within the next week, you'll receive a link to the recording and a post-webinar survey. We ask that you complete the survey to help us improve our webinars moving forward. Today's guest is Andrew Hartnett, the first Deputy Insurance Commissioner in the Iowa Insurance Division and the immediate past president of NASAA. Andrew's experience includes, but certainly is not limited to, being a state securities regulator, an assistant attorney general, and several years in private practice representing investment advisors and broker-dealers. Margie Weber is facilitating today's chat. Margie is the Regulatory Director of Compliance, focusing on the securities and insurance industries for Reg Ed. She has served as president of SILA, has been a member of SILA's advisory board, served on FINRA's Licensing and Registration Council, Registration Qualification Subcommittee, and is currently SILA's governance officer on its executive board of directors. She's a steering committee member on SILA's Securities Industry Subgroup and chairs SILA's NASAA Engagement Task Force. So please join me in welcoming Margie and Andrew to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Julie.
I think we may have lost Margie. She just, hold on, she may be trying to join with phone. Sorry, everybody, hold on.
So in the meantime, I could just tell you all, I did not take up boxing in the wake of my ceasing being NASAA president. Unfortunately, I made a trip to the dermatologist on Monday, and what was supposed to be, don't go to work on Monday, is still quite visible on Thursday. So I'm not trying to grow a terrible mustache in the wake of no longer being NASAA president, but here we are. All right, I don't have jokes to sustain us that much longer. So
I think she might be back. Margie, are you with us? Because she keeps leaving and coming back. Sorry, everybody. Oh, hold on.
I mean, I can start asking myself questions. It's going to be softball time.
Would anybody like to use the chat and ask a question? Is there something particular that you came here? And Julie can field that, and I can keep trying to get Margie on here.
Yeah. I mean, in the meantime, so one of the things she indicated to me that she wanted me to address was just, what is NASAA? There may be people on the call who don't know what NASAA is. So by way of, throwing myself a softball and starting as basically as possible, NASAA is not the space agency. It is the North American Securities Administrators Association. We have had some members who try to say NASAA or NASAA or something like that to distinguish it from the space agency, but it really hasn't stuck. It has largely been NASAA for just about everybody. I did say North America, so the 68 members are the 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, 13 Canadian provinces, Mexico, and as of April of this year, Guam. But of more functional importance, it's the organization that state securities regulators work together on model rules, multi-state enforcement actions, that kind of stuff. So that's NASAA, etc. So.
Okay, Margie's still working on trying to get in, have a little bit of technical difficulty. I know that one of the questions that came up prior to this that I was asked to make sure was asked today. I was going to save it for a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and roll with it. is with regard to the exams, have you seen an increase or a decline in the number of people taking the exams since the outlines were updated effective in June?
Yeah, and I think the question also wanted to know, have we seen an increase, are more people passing, or are they not? And the answer is really that it's too soon to know. We just don't have data to know how those, whether that's had any impact yet. So too early to say.
And as long as we're talking about that, another really hot topic, as I'm sure you know, is IARCE. Are you seeing any challenges with that on your end, with this being still relatively new, just in our second year?
Yeah. So no, we're not seeing a lot of challenges. I can tell you that we are. So I'm going to say we're up to 16 states. That doesn't, got to keep in mind the timeline, right? There are 11 states for whom it's effective this year, and then states that the 5 other states that have implemented will become will go on the system January 1. Those new states are Colorado, Florida, Nevada, North Dakota, and Tennessee. We know there are at least 2 other states that are pushing for a January 1, 24 implementation, but they're not final yet. So that's why they're not on my list of 5. If those
Andrew,
states,
Mark, back in. I apologize, folks.
hey, no worries.
I had to dial in by phone.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
So the only other thing I was going to say about IRCE is if those 2, so that would take us to 18 if they become final, that would get us to 43% of the registered IARs that would have to be subject to an IRCE requirement in 2024. The approved provider and course lists continue to grow. And NASAA was pleased to recently add a free, although with the exception of the roster reporting fee, 3.5 credit ethics course to its offering that's focused on serving neurodivergent clients. So that was a collaborative effort between our DEI, investor education, and IRCE committees. So while you were gone, we did What is NASAA, IRCE, and 63 updates from June. So that's sort of what we covered thus far.
And did you let them know I didn't tag you in your list? I,
I figured you had to go to the phone because you were like, I can't look at this for the next hour. I mean, that's just too much. I can't be serious if I have to see that.
oh.
So.
Well, apologies, folks, for the technical difficulties. I just, it's so frustrating. I'm really more comfortable in the live settings just because of all these tech challenges we have. So did you talk at all about NASAA models? Like, what is a NASAA model? Why are they important?
Yeah, so we haven't talked at all about that. So NASAA models, you want to talk process or just?
It's like the process. For example, earlier this month, while you were still NASAA President, the NASAA's BD Market and Regulatory Policy and Review Project Group published for public comment revisions to its dishonest and unethical business practices. So one question I have is, so is that work, or that project group, do they get weigh in from all of NASAA memberships before they push something out for public comment, or is it committee driven and the committees kind of stand alone?
Yeah, so the process NASAA follows, typically an idea for a model rule or a model rule revision. It starts with a project group or a committee. They see a need, they see an issue, and they start working on it and develop a proposal. The one you highlight is interesting because obviously there was the Reg BI committee, but that's such a big issue in the securities industry that arguably it's a little anomalous in terms of it's sort of originating, the need for it sort of originating everywhere and not just at a committee, whereas most, EVAP, for example, another one we might talk about, didn't originate everywhere. It originated in a much more from the committee sort of perspective. But anyway, so proposal would then go out to NASA membership for comment. So internal comment process, project group or committee, whoever is running it, reviews that internal comment process. And then, assuming that there's support from the NASA membership, or at the very least, they don't get comments back saying like, this is the craziest idea ever, why are you doing this? They they may make changes, but generally push it forward for external comment. So that's obviously where the BD one that you highlighted is. The sort of governance measure there is that the board has to approve publishing it for external comment. So then it goes out for external comment. The BD one you just mentioned, that's a 90-day public comment period, so it closes December 4th. And then I should call it the BI one rather than the BD one, but anyway, so it closes December 4th, but then the project group committee, whoever again, takes the public comment, reviews it, makes changes, doesn't make changes. We've had proposals withdrawn, so that's a possibility. Usually they don't get withdrawn, but it has happened. And then the project group or committee probably will seek permission for some version of that rule to be put to a membership vote. I say permission because, again, that's a board decision to put it to a membership vote. And then the final step for it to become a NASA model rule is for the membership to vote in favor of it. So at that point, it becomes a model rule. But then, of course, it's a NASA model rule. Each state has to then actually go and approve it. So
do NASA members, do they approve these models even when they don't have the intent to adopt it in their state? Do you think that happens?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the, it's hard to say. I mean, like right now, for example, I am, in my state, we are not doing any rulemaking. We're under a order to review all of our rules and try to simplify them and not implement new rules unless they're necessary for the public health kind of process. Right. And so, I don't feel like I can implement any NASA model right now, but it doesn't necessarily prevent me from voting on, I would still vote in favor of EVAP, for example. So I think some of, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No,
so I think some of that happens. I think, what you're really getting at is, are there members who vote for things that knowing full well they'll never implement it? And I don't know, that's not my view. My view is I'm the same in Iowa as I am at NASA. And so if it's not something that I would implement at home, then I don't want to vote for it.
This particular model that's out for public comment, the comment period ends December 4th, I believe. So the comments in, folks. As I understand it, the intent, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, NASA models are intended to create some uniformity among the jurisdictions, correct? Okay. So in this one, I thought it was odd that it has a menu of options that the states can actually select from. They can adopt some, all, or just portions of it. And so it almost seems like you're going to have a lack of uniformity among the states if they adopt different menu options. So it just seems, I bet you're going to get comments on that.
The thought had occurred to me. I mean, I think I think one of the responses to that is sure, but at least that menu is sort of limited to 8 different options. And so we're only talking about those 8 and not a menu of, an unlimited menu.
Mhm. Another
Um,
thing was, you've adopted it, you've included like SEC guidance language within it. So Reg BI itself doesn't have that language in it, in Reg BI. So it's almost creating a separate, potentially a separate conduct standard at states. No.
I think what I'm going to say is I look forward to receiving everyone's comments.
Okay. That sounds good. That sounds good. I look forward to reading them. Speaking of conduct standards, so Massachusetts fiduciary rule for broker-dealers was recently upheld. Do you believe, or do you have a feeling of whether other states are going to follow suit and start applying fiduciary standard of conduct to broker-dealers in their jurisdictions?
I haven't had
any?
I haven't had any state tell me, now that Massachusetts is one, I'm going to go do this. But I don't, I don't know. I also haven't had any state tell me, to be honest with you, I haven't had any state tell me the opposite either. So I don't think I have what I could tell you is my boss has been pretty clear with me that, and I've been therefore clear with other state regulators, that we're going to implement Reg BI in Iowa, and that's what our rule will be. So I probably, to the extent that there were a state that were going to do that, that I might not be the first one they would tell, given
Right.
given where we are. So
It's interesting. It's an interesting topic to follow for sure. So want to move off of that topic?
I mean, we could talk about the exam report if you like, but I don't, while we have a comment period open, and given,
Right. Let's
given
do
what
that, because at the time they proposed the amendments to this Reg BI, to add Reg BI into the the conduct standard, or the dishonest and unethical business practices model. They also released the phase 2B of the Reg BI. So why don't you highlight that for us real quick?
Yeah, so, this was something I talked about a lot during my time as president. That state regulators wanted to understand how Reg BI is working. It started with 1A was a survey, 2A, or one, I guess phase 1, it wasn't an A and B at phase 1, but 1 was a survey, 2A was a survey. 2A came out in November of 21. That report flagged certain areas of concern. Got a lot of pushback, candidly. I think certain subsequent reports from other regulators also expressed concerns that at least we felt like were similar concerns. But what we said at the time was, look, we're going to go out and do on-site exams, and so that's the next phase of our of our attempt to understand how Reg BI has changed things. And so that the results of that were reported on September 5th. So unlike the first ones, which were sort of surveys, this was on-site or remote examinations conducted by state examiners in years 2 and 3 of Reg BI. The examiners were given uniform exam modules to use as a guide, to try to, and we're focused on qualitative findings to identify areas where firms were meeting or exceeding state expectations, or, identifying areas where firm compliance appeared weaker. There were over 200 on-site or remote state exams conducted by 25 states. The firms varied in size, business model, location. States picked each target themselves. So, sorry about that. There was no, that was each state sort of doing that themselves. The report talks, and this is something that previous reports have sort of received some pushback on, but speaks in terms of CCRs, complex, costly, and risky products, And by those, we mean leveraged and inverse exchange traded funds, non-traded REITs, variable annuities, and private placements. So high-level findings. First, firms have been updating their investor profile forms and enhancing their policies and procedures to focus more directly on Reg BI obligations. We'd still like to see, though, more specific instruction with respect to considerations of reasonably available alternatives and conflict mitigation. I could talk more about reasonably available alternatives in a minute. Firms recommending those costly, complex, risky products I just mentioned are imposing product-specific restrictions based on age, net income, net worth, risk profiles, and are using exception reports to monitor compliance with those restrictions. It's a good thing. Firms are using helpful cost comparison tools to better consider reasonably available alternatives. Good. But still ignoring common lower cost and lower risk products when recommending CCRs. And then finally, in terms of my high level sort of results from this, firms are still relying on financial incentives to sell CCR products, and there's little uniformity in implementing effective firm mitigation strategies. Report's dense. I don't want to spend our full hour on that. Couple of quick things to mention. One thing I talked about a lot sort of while this was going on, just in part because I got a comment early on that states were unique in focusing on it. So what the heck? Is that not all firms are collecting information as part of a customer profile on a customer's debt. So this was highlighted in the report as a best practice. It was an issue NASAA highlighted back in the 2A survey report, and the SEC included debt as part of establishing a reasonable understanding of a retail investor's investment profile in its staff bulletin on account recommendations. So debt, kind of just an interesting little sub issue there. And then on reasonably available alternatives, that's one that we've talked about a lot. The pushback tends to be, that when I say that, the comparison for a non-traded REIT is another non-traded REIT, and it shouldn't be, that, there are folks in the audience who are like, well, but look, we're looking at a non-traded REIT for exposure to an alternative investment, and that's why only alternative investments are among the reasonably available alternatives. So I get that. I think about the SEC's complaint in Western International, and one of the things that they alleged there was that the firm simply provided no guidance on how to consider reasonably available alternatives. And, that's what we've seen in some of our exams. It's, that there's no guidance on how to consider lower cost products and investment strategies when recommending high cost products to retail customers. No guidance on how to consider low risk products when recommending speculative and high risk products. And we're also, we also didn't see, documentation about that analysis necessarily. But, back to the pushback, it may well be that after considering those lower cost and lower risk products, the desire for exposure to an alternative investment does trump. It's just, we want to see the policies and procedures that are making sure that everything's being considered and, the documentation there. So that's.
But overall progress was detected. So
right.
Overall.
I tried to say good thing as I was marching through some of those findings. Yep.
All right, but you guys do not like FINRA's remote branch section pilot. So that temporary relief is set to expire. FINRA's got temporary relief. The states don't necessarily have temporary relief, but FINRA has the remote branch inspection relief through the end of this year, and they've got their pilot out there. They're trying to push through to get it approved. The SEC, I think, September 1st, I think, was the last comment letter from NASAA on it, still wanting to push back on a few things. You want to highlight concerns about that particular proposal?
Yeah, I mean, so we've, as you noted, we've generally opposed the pilot. You know, initially, part of that opposition was sort of, we didn't really feel like it was a pilot if you were sort of letting everybody do it for 3 years. And we tried to, you know, maybe suggest an alternative course. We're also concerned that, you know, we hadn't seen data that demonstrated that the remote supervision that had occurred during the pandemic had been effective. As time has gone on, you know, the comment letters have focused more on the idea of, okay, look, we understand this is, you know, establishing sort of a principles-based rule, but we'd like to, well, you know, what I'd say is we'd like to see a minimum floor as part of that principle. And so that's what the letters are continuing to push on. You know, and the reason for that is just that, you know, I think a lot of times when I talk to people about this, they think of, you know, large firms with massive budgets to, you know, for technology to implement sort of remote supervision. But, you know, part of what we're thinking about is small firms who are selling those, you know, costly, complex products I was just talking about, and may not have the same technological budget to implement remote supervision. And so that's why, you know, in one of the comment letters I was looking back on to try to, you know, we were urging FINRA to, you know, mandate, okay, don't just, you know, suggest that firms should be able to use technological tools such as electronic surveillance, activity-based sampling reviews, and visual inspections, you know, mandate that to be a part of the floor. And that's, I think, you know, again, in part, it's because sort of thinking about if this is going to be open to everyone, making sure that all firms understand what, you know, that minimum floor of reasonableness really is. But the last thing I just want to emphasize here is, you know, we have been opposed to it. It doesn't mean, though, that we are, you know, that we don't understand that technology is changing the way that people work and where people work. You know, we just want, but before we move to, you know, sort of approving these, or well, we're not going to approve it, the SEC will, but before, you know, the industry moves to these remote branch inspections, we have just wanted to see sort of, again, a higher assurance of adequate investor protection before embarking on these remote inspections. So that's really where our comment letters have come from.
Thanks for that. I know that the state of Maine, just for those of you that may not be aware of it, has recently issued, I think like 28 firms have been sanctioned for failure to conduct on-site annual branch office inspections. So they've been doing that this summer, and there are other states out there that do have an annual on-site branch inspection requirement. So you need to be really checking what your jurisdictions rules say about remote inspections as well. What about the residential supervisory location proposal, Andrew? What are you guys as concerned about that one as you are the remote branch inspection?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously the highest risk sort of branch is going to be one where there's sales activity. You know, the core, I think, of our letters here is that that's true, but, you know, ones where supervision is happening are also really important. And that's, you know, that's why FINRA Rule 3110 requires supervisory locations to be inspected more frequently than non-supervisory locations. It's, you know, we've cited in one of the comment letters to a reg notice from 2014 about, you know, the need to conduct focused reviews of one-person OSJ locations. So most of our, you know, FINRA has incorporated a lot of our comments. At this point, I think the main sticking point is their current proposal would move these residential locations to a 3-year or presumably a 3-year exam cycle. Obviously, they could be examined sooner, but to a 3-year exam cycle. And we've suggested that for the reasons I just suggested, that supervisory locations are still really important, that they remain on the 1-year exam cycle. So I think that that seems to be the main disagreement at this point.
Okay, thanks for that. I know that earlier this year, NASA celebrated the 5th anniversary of the Senior Safe Act. So congratulations, yay!
Yeah, thank you.
In the helm, aren't you? Are you? What's next for you with NASA? I should say.
Yeah. No. So ironically, right after this, like literally at 4 o'clock Eastern, I will go and join Rich Such's last call as Seniors Committee Chair. For those of you that don't know, Rich is leaving the state of New Jersey and is going to go join a law firm. And Claire McHenry, the current NASA president, has asked me to succeed him as Seniors Committee Chair. So that's what's next for me at NASA. So that's exciting. The 5-year anniversary of Senior Safe was, a nice anniversary. We've made a lot of progress. Going back a little farther than Senior Safe, there was the Model Act to protect vulnerable adults. We're now up to about, roughly 36 states that have some version of that report and hold law. I think, my last notes have Georgia and Kansas filing it. I want to say at least one, if not both of them, passed it this year. So we continue to add new states, but I apologize. I didn't remember to update that, and I don't know for sure. Couple of interesting stats, just because I think some of the senior fraud stats are interesting. In 2021, U.S. NASA members reported receiving 1,428 reports of suspected senior financial exploitation. That was a 35% increase over 2020 and a 118% increase over 2019. And state investigations were up in 2021 based on those notifications. They increased 57% from 2020 and 98% from 2019. That data is a little bit dated because I'm having to take it from the 2022 enforcement report, because the 2023 one is going to come out, I think, in about a week. So we're doing this just before it comes out. So a little bit dated, but it gives you some idea of just how fast our the notifications we're receiving and the number of investigations we're doing are increasing as a result of those laws.
Is it an increase in fraud that's triggering these outreaches to the states, or is it maybe the message is being proliferated out into the, are people more aware now? Hey, I have state securities regulators that I can contact.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I think if you were to pick, there's another little bit we could talk about here in terms of the increase of digital asset senior fraud, but I'm saving that one. Something to look forward to. But I think my sense is that it's not an increase in actual fraud. It's just an increase in awareness of these mechanisms. And so it's an increase in reporting and an increase in investigation, but not an increase in victimization. I think the victimization was already there.
Well, kudos to NASA for, I mean, I've detected in the past 2 years specifically an increase in investor protection, just small bites that you can push out on social media. So I follow NASA on Facebook specifically, and I push that, or I follow you socially on LinkedIn and everything, but on Facebook, that's where your investors are, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I push those out, and I have people comment to me, oh, thank you, I didn't know that. And there is a lot of, I mean, it seems to be a constant flow of investor protection, little snippets that are coming out from NASA. So that very good, very good.
Yeah, thank you. We're trying. I mean, we're trying. You know, there's particularly with digital assets, where we have a couple that we're working on topics there. We've been trying to do stuff on, know your advisor and that kind of stuff. I mean, not that we haven't done that before. It's always sort of evergreen though, because, you think about, we've seen such an increase in digital, not digital asset, but just online kind of, online scams and all. And so, some of that is you're trying to educate on the cryptocurrency side, but some of it is just, if you were working with an advisor, they would tell you that sounds crazy to, send money to win the Jamaican lottery or whatever. And so, you're trying to sort of hit it from all sorts of different directions. But
so anything else on digital assets?
yeah, I mean, this is something that, NASA started sounding the alarm about many years ago. One of the things I always liked highlighting was BitConnect, which is long forgotten, but back in 2018, several states took coordinated action about BitConnect and alleging that it was a massive fraud. That sort of shut it down, but DOJ last year finally indicted the founder. So cool example of state securities regulators being on the real front end there. That led to Operation Crypto Sweep back in 2018, which resulted in more than 330 inquiries and investigations and 85 enforcement actions. And more recently, there have been coordinated investigations of unregistered firms. And these are lately have been more about, traditional depository accounts or things that look like traditional depository accounts, except they're not, they're offered by crypto firms. Promised rates of interest are typically significantly greater than yields earned through regulated banks, sometimes 10 or 15%. Some of the most prominent results of that were joint settlements with the SEC and two firms, BlockFi and Nexo. You've probably also seen 10 states filed against Coinbase. SEC also filed against Coinbase. These are, not the only state investigations that are occurring. So a lot of activity here. It's also, to sort of circle back to the scam thing, it's also, I don't know exactly where it's going to be when the enforcement report comes out in a week, but I'll be surprised if it's not, like the number one kind of investigation, or it's going to be in the top 5 that, we're just seeing a lot of digital asset investigations. So I mentioned the senior and digital asset thing earlier, so let me just mention that here briefly. So again, unfortunately, we're in this space where we're a week before the new enforcement report, so I'm having to talk to you about particularly age data, but last year's enforcement report showed a 70% increase in the number of investigations in cases involving potential illegal or fraudulent conduct linked to digital assets. And that stat is very consistent with the FTC's report on senior financial exploitation, which was also last fall. and that found that investment scams had increased over 200% since 2020, and they attributed much of the surge in losses to cryptocurrency investment scams. Some of state regulators I've talked to think that COVID sort of changed things because in terms of the senior investor space, because where before maybe you had more older investors who were fine sort of leaving the internet to others, when all of a sudden we needed to communicate through Zoom, we needed to communicate through Teams, we needed to communicate through Google Meets, it sort of opened the world in a way that all of those things became more, I don't know, more real, more appealing. I don't know if that's true, but it sort of rings true given some of the data that I was just talking about and that we've seen. So
they're just less savvy tech-wise, and I just shudder to think about some of the stuff. My mother-in-law, bless her heart, she gets targeted a lot, and it's not always obvious to her that don't reply.
Right,
don't
right.
Remember.
When I don't know if this is some of the latest. When I first started doing senior investor, and I am trying to remember that, older investor stuff, not quite 10 years ago, but we talked about diminished capacity as one of the things that facilitated this. But my understanding is the newer research is suggesting that loneliness is an even bigger thing that sort of facilitates people's susceptibility to fraud and scams, which makes sense, right? I mean,
It does.
affinity frauds and all that kind of stuff, but it's sort of a terrifying research finding in many ways. So anyway.
Yeah. To the attendees on the call, we are taking questions via chat, so plug your questions in there. So Andrew, I mean, looking more and more like our friends on the Hill aren't going to get it together before October 1st. We may be looking at a federal government shutdown. How does that affect state government and state securities regulators specifically? Is it pretty transparent to you all, or do you all actually get impacted significantly?
We still come to work every day, so I mean, in that way, there's not a huge effect, but I mean, it's sort of, it affects everybody when the federal government shuts down, right? So it's just a question of whether it's a second level effect or a third level effect or so I already know that there was something that Claire, the president, was going to be doing with the SEC investor advocate in 2 weeks, and now because of fears that of the shutdown, it's been rescheduled or is not happening in 2 weeks. And so, I mean, that's a small example, but the answer is really that, we're still going to investigate our cases. We're still going to be doing our examinations. But there are going to be effects where, we come upon something and we want to call the SEC and they're not there, or we want, so.
I think we do have one comment in the chat, or one question in the chat. Is there a centralized location to identify what courses are required? I'm assuming it's what qualification exams are required to solicit variable life products in each state. Example, only requiring Series 7, Series 6, or additional state exams, or are additional state exams required?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a centralized location that just says, if you want to do this, then here are the precise exams. It could be out there, but that's not it's not a resource that I can think of.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it either. I would think SILA would be the place to look or something like that, maybe something in a chart or something. So let's see here. What other anything else that we haven't talked about already, since I missed the first like 15 minutes? It seems like it took me that long to get into the call.
I think you wanted to chat a little bit about EVAP, as I recall.
Yes. EVAP.
All right.
Exam
So
validity extension program.
That's right.
EVAP.
Yeah, FINRA has the maintaining qualification program, so we had to pick something that was different enough that people would know, wouldn't confuse the two. So the exam validity extension program is, basically is the sort of answer to the, or is we hope is the answer to the problem of you enter it, you go into MQP, you have you do your CE for 4 years, you come back in, and you're 63 or 66, depending upon how you were doing it, depending upon what state you're in, has lapsed, even though your 7 is still good. We've notified 60,000 people of their eligibility. Over 1,600 have already opted in. In order to participate, an individual has to have been registered as an agent for at least 1 year. You have to be in and maintain compliance with MQP, and you have to have a valid Series 63. If the Series 63 validity is already expired, they're unable to participate. Fee is, there's a $35 fee, and IAR EVAP is on track to launch next month. The requirements are similar, except the individual has to maintain compliance with IARCE rather than MQP in terms of the continuing education. NASA.org/EVAP for all EVAP related updates. We have one state that has implemented the rule. So there's sort of like two parts to this. The agent can opt in to EVAP now, but the state has to, we talked earlier about model rules. The state has to have passed a model rule by the time the agent wants to take advantage of EVAP in order for it to work out. And
but
so at this
should
point,
still apply, correct? Shouldn't they
What's
still
that?
apply for it? Shouldn't they
Yeah.
still apply for it? So they're in the queue when the state does, if the state does kind of
That's
adopt
right.
the model.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a little bit of a, risk, right? I mean, I was honest earlier that I want to do that. I mean, look, I worked on some of the EVAP model rules earlier in their life. Like I want to do them, but I'm in a situation where, because I can't say that they're necessary for public safety or public health, I can't do new rulemaking right now. So I can't, at some point I hope to be able to do these rules, but I can't do them because of the rulemaking moratorium that I have. So it's, it's a little bit of a gamble, because if a state hasn't implemented their rule, then you've opted in for nothing. On the other hand, if you don't opt in, you lose the ability to it 2 years because your 63 is no longer valid. So, I mean, for my risk reward system, it's worth paying the $35 to opt in, and hopefully, it all works out. But there is a risk there that I want to be clear about.
And Wisconsin's Deb Fabrit has chimed in on chat, reminding us that there is a NASA panel at the SILA conference on this topic. So
thank you, Deb.
I think it's Wisconsin that is the one that's adopted EVAP. I'm not sure though. Deb, let me know.
It's Minnesota is the one who has done it thus far. There are other states that are trying, so it may well be that they're in process. Yeah. So that's what I was going to say about EVAP.
Okay.
All
So
right.
switch gears from NASA real quick and just talk about you. So besides, being busted up.
What's that?
Besides your lip being busted up.
Yeah, right. So besides, I took up boxing.
Give me, you have your option. What is the best advice you've ever received, or what is the best advice you've ever given?
So I don't know whether I received this. I've definitely given it. One of my favorite pieces is be you. And it's kind of basic, but I feel like there's a whole lot of, you need to be this, you need to be that, you need to be, and I find that people like authenticity. And so being who you are and emphasizing your strengths and being honest about who you are, being authentic, those are things that I think people really like and appreciate. And so, maybe I should have come up with something deeper and more profound and whatever, but I really like be you. So
be you.
yeah,
Right.
go. No, please.
Actually, I don't think we have any other questions in the chat. I think I'm all here.
So
Okay, well, if there are no other questions in the chat, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us today. Margie, thank you for facilitating our discussion. And of course, thank you for all of your SILA and SILA Foundation support. We appreciate both of you so much. There will not be a webinar in October, and we hope to see all of your faces at the annual education conference in Hollywood, Florida next month. Please watch for a notice for the November webinar on the very important topic of coping with stress and grief through the holidays. Remember that our webinars are public and free of charge, and we appreciate you sharing our invitations. Please watch for and complete the post-webinar survey, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. This was great. Appreciate it.